This is Richard Wolff from Democracy at Work, responding to another Ask Prof Wolff question sent in from our Patreon community. This one comes from Griffin Abbott. And Griffin Abbott asks an important question. Griffin notes that in my other talks, I have explained that slavery, feudalism, and capitalism all have often displayed a mixture of private enterprises and state enterprises. Private enterprise is owned and operated by a citizen who has no particular governmental position. A state enterprise is owned and operated by whatever the government is in a society. So, for example, you had private masters with their slaves, and you had governments that also had slaves. You had private lords in feudalism and governments or states that had serfs, like a private lord did in feudalism. And here in capitalism, you all know that we have some private employers with their employees, and then the government, like the post office or like the military or all kinds of things, also have employees. So the capitalist system, employer-employee, has both private and state, just like feudalism and slavery. So Griffin Abbott asks, how would that look in an economy of the sort we talk about a lot, namely a worker co-op run economy? To get this clear, I think it might be useful to keep separate two things. On the one hand, ownership. Who is the legal owner of an enterprise? And the second part, to keep separate, is how is the enterprise run? Who runs it and how is it run? There is no need to assume that the answer is the same. People who own an enterprise often do not run it. Give you an example. In capitalism, shareholders own most big corporations. They do not run them. To run a corporation, you have to be on the board of directors. It is not required that you own shares of stock. Most directors don't, or don't own very many. Ownership is separated from operating the enterprise. And what capitalism is about mostly is that operating the enterprise. Who gives the orders, who takes them? The employer, like the board of directors in a corporation, they may not own much, but they give the orders to the employees. That's their job. Okay, well, let's now do it for a worker co-op enterprise. It could be owned by the individuals who are in the enterprise. It's a worker co-op where the workers run the business, operate the business, make all the key decisions, and also own the business. What would it be if the government did it? Then the government would own the business, but the government wouldn't be making the decisions. That's the workers, because that's what worker co-op means. The workers are the people who make the decisions, who do the actual work, who are both employer and employee, because that's what makes it no longer capitalist. So you could have the state owning, you could have private owning. And there's a variety of reasons why societies would do that. They want, perhaps, that there be some collective responsibility for a particular activity, something that kind of everybody needs, that's a little bit different from the particular work most private enterprises do. A society might decide that something like food is so important that they want the society as a whole to run it, to look over it. They want to be able to, say, vote to elect governmental bodies that supervise and control the production of food in a way that is more directly responsive to the mass of people than you might have in an enterprise that's owned by a small collection of individuals. There are lots of reasons, but there's no problem conceptually or theoretically between having state and private worker co-ops coexisting in a society. All right, now let's go to the second part of Griffin Abbott's question. Who then has decision-making power? That's getting a little bit more interesting and a little bit more subtle in terms of the theory. And here I have to remind people that if you pay close attention to what we argue, we do never stop by saying all of the story of what happens in an enterprise is going to be decided by the democratic decision of all the workers. We focus on that, we stress that, because that's what's so different from capitalism. But in the end, the workers, when they take over and run an enterprise, when there is no longer a separate group of people called employers who tell the employees at the workplace what to do, it's going to become very clear very quickly that every enterprise impacts the surrounding community, whether it's because people drive their cars to the enterprise and park and drive through city streets where there can be accidents, where there's wear and tear on the road, when there's air pollution. That has to be worked out. If there's smokestacks coming out of the enterprise, those impact the people in the environment. The very gathering of people together in large numbers in an enterprise affects the local stores, the local movie theater. In other words, what an enterprise does affects the community. And if we're going to be true to the democratic commitment that lies at the base of the worker co-op kind of economy, then we have to allow a participation in the decisions made in the workplace by the community outside the workplace that's affected by what the enterprise does, and vice versa. That is, the community makes decisions that impact the workplace and the enterprise, and that has to be worked out. There has to be a joint, co-respective decision-making process. Each side has to have a veto, perhaps, over the other, or things have to be agreed by both the democratic decision-making in the workplace and the democratic decision-making in the community at large. By the way, again, here's a parallel. Capitalist enterprises also have impacted their communities, and they've had to work out some relationship. It hasn't been democratic, but that's no surprise because the enterprises themselves aren't democratic. Instead, in capitalism, what happens is that the bosses, the directors, the owners, cut deals with the leading politicians, and we all live with the result. That can't happen in a worker co-op based economy because all of the workers are involved in the decision making, and they will demand likewise that all of the residents of a surrounding community participate as well. A worker-based economic system will be much more democratic than anything in which you had a small group of people controlling the economic system, because inevitably, when that happened, whether it was a master in slavery, or a lord in feudalism, or a board of directors of a corporation in capitalism, that small group of people cut the deals with the surrounding community's small group of people, and that was never democratic. I hope this responds to your question, and thank you, and to the whole Patreon community for your interest and your support.